indeed, we are exactly where we need to be at all times. And as Amy was singing, as Nana was praying, all of those things incorporated this idea of trust in life. And I think about a month ago, I shared with you that I was awakened out of my sleep one night with this phrase. And the phrase was that the source of all pain is a mistrust in the divine. A mistrust in the divine. And so when we, on this spiritual collective path, try to begin to define what divine is, we have all kinds of different takes about that. We call it God. We understand it to be intelligence. We understand it to be source. We understand it to be the backbone of all life, the essence, the vibration, the energy. I was reminded last week when I was walking in New York because they had those ads again for the body exhibit. Did any of you ever see that when it was in Atlanta? The body exhibit. And what they've done, I know it sounds kind of gross, but they've taken cadavers and they've taken these bodies and they've put them through these special chemicalization processes where one cadaver you get to see the entire circulatory system of a body. The other one, the respiratory system, the other one, the skeletal system. And saw it years ago, and I had no interest in wanting to see it. The person that I was with was just so gung-ho. They were bored. I was fascinated. I couldn't be pulled out of there because I just stood in awe of the genius that had created this symbiotic nature of all of these systems that we call simply the human body. Simply the human body. And the fact that that intelligence, that genius, that life essence, the same one that then hung the moon and the stars and the multitude of galaxies, the one that orchestrates the changing of the seasons and the way in which nature replicates and exemplifies itself, that level of genius. And I am dumbfounded and dumbstruck at the way in which we, and I include myself, don't trust that. No, I got this. I'm going to handle it. You just heal my paper cut. I'll deal with the rest of it, right? But that's where the source of all of our pain is the fact that the magnitude, the immeasurable magnitude of that level of intelligence and genius is something that we second guess, fight, or resist. And so, of course, by doing that, we invoke pain. We invoke separation. We draw it upon ourselves because we are unwilling to simply surrender to that genius and to begin to do this old-fashioned thing, which is to trust life in all of its variables and all of its winding turns, and to know that to be malleable and flexible with that winding road is the beauty of the human adventure. But we want to micromanage that. And we want to be in control of that. And we think because of our past history and the collective surroundings and the stories that we have gathered, that we know better than that. So that's crazy. Just crazy. And so today I called this near life experience. And that title reminds me of stepping on the scale. You know, the ones where you have to move the weight bar. Of course, if you're in my direction, we want the weight bar to go that way, but we keep moving it that way, especially after Thanksgiving. But if that scale was the scale of life, and one end of the scale was stagnation and death, and the other was the full-blown expression of life, we would want to keep moving things over towards that fuller expression. And more towards the nearer the life experience rather than the stagnation. And this idea of trust is the thing that brings us, catapults us, targets us more towards being in alignment with that thing called life. And the thing that makes the scale so hard to move is simply stubbornness. We're funny about stubbornness because some of us wear our stubbornness as if it is a badge of courage and a badge of honor. Oh, he's stubborn, as if that's a quality to uphold. But I want to tell you that stubbornness is actually lazy. To be stubborn is to be lazy, because the reason why we become stubborn is because we distrust. And what's behind that level of distrust is an overarching fear. Fear that the divine doesn't know what it's doing. And so we dig in our heels and we become crotchety and old and stubborn. And in doing that, we glorify this thing called fear. And we want to, if we really looked at it, we want to punish people. We want to punish those things that make us feel that way. You know, I'm going to be stubborn, so I'm not going to talk to you. I'm going to be stubborn, so I'm going to cut you out of my life. I'm going to be stubborn, so I'm going to withhold my good, my affection, my knowledge. I'm going to be stubborn. And so in doing that, what we do is we become punishers. And in being a punisher, we're just the same as any dictator on earth that we badmouth and judge. We are dictators in our own right by being stubborn, because we want to judge those people, because ultimately we're stuck in our fear and we have a mistrust in the divine. So I went out on a school night last night. Ty and I went to the movies and we saw Doctor Strange. It was fabulous. It's spiritual. So you gotta go. But the Ancient One in Doctor Strange says to him that we never lose our demons, we only learn to live above them. And that's one of the things that we've often talked about here, is that being on this spiritual path does not mean that everything that was an irritant to you is suddenly going to leave. If I or any other spiritual teacher were to tell you that by coming to church or becoming spiritual or doing all this work that you'll never have any problem ever again, then they're being out of integrity. It's not that the demons would leave. It's not that the irritants leave. It's that you and I become masterful and change the relationship with those things. In other words, we are not at the mercy of them. We begin to tell them who's in charge through consciousness, by understanding. That means then that I can be in this world, but not of it. And the world needs you to be in the world, but not of it. To be in the pathway of the seeming demon, to be in the pathway of the seeming mistrust, to be in the pathway of everything that seems incongruent with God, and to know simultaneously that it's all God. Isn't that the assignment? So it's not to be so heavenly minded you're no earthly good, so then we just climb on a mountain and stare at our navel. And of course we're not going to have any conflict because we're not with people. But to crawl down off that mountain after you've aligned your chakras, crawl down the mountain and go into the Times Square of your existence to know the truth. We never lose those demons. We only learn to live above them. In other words, we trust. We trust the divine. The brilliant Ram Dass said the same thing. He said, take what shows up on your plate and transform it until it feeds you. Don't take your plate and scrape it off and then soaking bubbles and rinse it off. No, take what's on your plate and transform it through the renewal of your mind until it feeds you. Just like we've always said, we've been sent nothing but angels. We've been sent nothing but guidance. We've been sent nothing but the most divine instruction. Take those situations, take the irritant and transform it until it feeds you on your evolutionary growth, so that you and I return to this masterful state. Ram Dass also said, if you think you're enlightened, spend a weekend with your family. So, which I'm sensing many of you did. You're all a little bit in recovery mode today. So I'm here to help, here to do what I can. Trust is real, okay? And so as we look at those things, we begin to see it's not about running away. It's not about being stubborn. It's about understanding that all things truly are working in right alignment. Oh my God, the genius that comprised you. The genius, just like Amy was singing, that the mother and the father coming together in the kiss, and the thing that made us. Think of the intelligence behind that. And here we are trying to micromanage every little snippet and detail. And so one of those things then to have that life experience is to learn to relax and to trust. The second thing is to do an old-fashioned count your blessings. You know, like we've heard already this morning, Thanksgiving isn't just a holiday, it's a lifestyle. Count your blessings. So last week I worked every day in New York, and I revived my counseling practice, which I've done there many times before, and I saw 18 people in 3 days, and we're doing some heavy-duty work, and the last person I saw, it was Thanksgiving Eve, and the location I was working out of was getting ready to close. She was my last client, and in she walked, and she said, "I'm sorry, I'm a little late. I got off work, and the girls they told me to come have a margarita with them, so I had to go have a margarita with them." And I said, "That's okay, sit down." And she already had this great personality. And she started to tell me this story about, she lives in a studio apartment in Queens, that the past year she had shared with her mentally ill nephew who refused to take medication. And she had no medical assistance for him. So she said, you know, you can imagine it was not the most pleasant of living conditions. And she said, but I kept the faith, kept working, kept researching, and finally we got him appropriate housing. So I have my space back, and my spirit's revived, and she says, I'm just really excited. And her name was Alberta. And I said, what are you excited about, Alberta? And she said, well, she said, I've realized that my whole work experience in my life has been just one job after another. She says, I've had jobs, but I've never had a career. She goes, I'm ready. I'm ready to have a career. And I said, tell me what that is. And she said, I'm ready to go back to school because I want to learn medical billing. She goes, it's harder than you sound. It sounds. You have to learn anatomy and physiology because you have to be able to decipher what it is that the doctors are talking about. You have to be able to translate that into this coding. And she goes, I'm ready and I'm excited to go back to school. She said, so I've taken longer hours to be able to do that. I've enrolled, and I'm like, this is wonderful. And somewhere in that conversation, she slipped in the fact that she was 70. And I went, wait a minute. Excuse me? What? I said, you're what? She says, I'm 70. And I went, oh my God, I love you. And she was so excited, and her energy was contagious. And even given most of the trial and tribulation and suffocation of her living experience, here was this woman whose spirit, this indomitable spirit, was nothing but counting her blessings and her enthusiasm for her goal, her intent to create a career for herself. And I loved her. And she gave me far more than I could give to her. And I think when we look at the idea of riding the scale more towards the embodiment of life, we start to see how we have subtly succumbed to what the world dictates is and isn't appropriate. By age, by skill set, by this is over for me. And we start to see that nothing standard applies to you unless you make your life standard. And I don't know about you, but I love when Emerson told us to be nonconformist. To live that life of nonconformity and to not accept that. That to me is the fullness of light. She has moved that scale over and she is embodying that. And I guarantee you that she will finish and she will graduate and she will have a career. And lastly is the idea that as we regain this level of trust, as we become accustomed to counting our blessings, we realize that that comes with a responsibility. And that responsibility is to live that and to be that in this world, right? Not to keep it for ourselves, but to be that in this world. So I read this story about Howard Schultz, who was a CEO with Starbucks, and that years ago he had taken businessmen to Israel, and they were going to have an audience with this famous rabbi, Rabbi Finkel, who was the head of a seminary there. And they were ushered into this boardroom, and they waited 10, 15 minutes for this rabbi to come. And the doors opened, and they weren't prepared for what they were going to see. Because when Rabbi Finkel came in, he was stricken with Parkinson's disease, very advanced Parkinson's disease. So not only did his body shake, but his voice trembled as well. These businessmen were sitting at this big conference table, and Rabbi Finkel was assisted, and he sat down at the head of this table. And as we are likened to do when we don't know what to do, we turn away. So all these businessmen won't look at him. They turn away. And Rabbi Finkel takes his shaking fist and he hits the table and he says, "Look at me. Look at me." And he goes, "I want one of you, any of you, to tell me what the lesson was from the Holocaust." And they're all kind of sitting around, and one man very softly says, never forget, never forget. And he goes, "No." He goes, "Need I remind you that as we were being ushered into these camps, we were told that we were going to be on work farms. And we were put into these train cars. And the train tracks actually stopped at these respective camps. And when the trains stopped, husbands were separated from their wives, mothers were separated from their children, and we were grouped in these collectives, and we were ushered into these bunkers where we were going to sleep. And as we went through these lines, they would give a blanket to one person, for one blanket for every 5 individuals." And he said, so the person who got the blanket had a decision to make. And that was when they went to their bunkers that night to sleep. That person had the decision of whether to keep that blanket for themselves or to share it and cover it with the rest of those 5. And he goes, that's the lesson from the Holocaust. Share the blanket. He goes, I want you, American businessmen, to go back to your country, and I want you to teach your people that they must learn to share the blanket. To share the blanket. Because you see, when we understand the fullness of life, then we know that there is no limitation. And we also understand that there is no external force that can come and take away anything from you unless you consciously or unconsciously agree that that can be taken away from you. Let me repeat that again. Because you see, that's the thing that goes back to step number one, which is about a mistrust in the divine, because we succumb to the idea that the external world has some miraculous power that can supersede the power that hung the moon and the stars. We believe that somehow there is an external power that can supersede consciousness, that can come in and invade you because you are helpless to that thing. Do you and I not remember and understand that no such thing can occur when in mind you understand and know who you are, what you are, whose you are, and from whence you came? So as we remember this, as we begin to understand that there is more than enough, then we physically, metaphorically, emotionally, spiritually start to share the blanket, not only of our knowledge, but of our good, of our joy, of our tutelage, of anything that we have with the rest of the collective of those around us. We begin to share the blanket of what it is that we've learned. What's the good then in coming to something like this or studying this kind of stuff if we don't live it and share it? Now, I'm not necessarily talking about standing on a soapbox and proselytizing, but I'm talking about living it in such a way that you cannot help but begin to magnetize that level of influence, that level of understanding out into the world. And so that's what we do. We begin to understand that as we near a greater life experience, we don't have to be so stubborn, that does not serve us in the least. That just like Alberta, we get to count our blessings. By the way, at the end of her session, I said, Alberta, this one's on me. I said, I just thank you so much. You put the perfect button on the end of all of these sessions. And she said, She goes, I wrote that check out this morning. And you are not going to rob me of my good. And I said, okay. And so we start to see there's more than enough. And then when we begin to share the blanket, we begin to see the power of vibration and intention. There's a great analogy about a healing temple. And it says, imagine that you go into this temple, and the only thing that has ever occurred in this temple is nothing but prayers of expansion. The only words that have ever been spoken in the interior of this temple are prayers of declaration and acknowledgement and gratitude. That the only language that has ever been uttered inside this temple is one of reverence and respect. And that over time, the energy, the collective energy of all of that reverence and sacredness has permeated the walls. So that when anyone walks into that temple, they are automatically transformed. Just like that scripture says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. People were transformed by the renewal of the intention within the vibration and the atmosphere of that temple. And the analogy of that is the fact that you and I are the temple, you see. That we have the ability to be that. So that the interior of what we are is so sacred and so in alignment with what we spoke of today. So trustful of the divine. So trustful of the divine. So willing to live in the spaciousness and the sustainability of counting our blessings. And so being willing to share what it is that we have. That without even opening our mouth, without even speaking, it becomes like the woman who touched the hem of Jesus' garment. Didn't say a word. He didn't say a word. She didn't say a word. I know. See, they know it already. and they just want to go to lunch. We're a little bit slower. So thank you, Master. We're going to catch up to you. But that when people are in your arena, in your vibration, they are automatically transformed. That is what you and I are called to do. That is what living in gratitude is all about. And that's what it means to be living, to have a life experience. Yes. Look at that life experience over there. Isn't that precious? Hey, sweetie. And just like there was something to comfort that, there's something to comfort you. Just like there is sustenance for that child, there is sustenance for you. Do you get that? Why are we so mistrustful of our path? May we be healed of that. May we know better. And in our knowing, may we do better. And in our doing, may we serve better. And in our service, may we come to understand fully the expansion of life. And so it is. Hi, I'm David Ault, and I simply want to say thanks. Thanks for taking the time to watch our broadcast here at Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta. We have a vision, and that vision is to reawaken all to their spiritual magnificence. And one of the ways that we are able to do that is through this very medium of broadcasting. So if you got anything out of this, if you felt in any way inspired, or if something spoke to you directly, then I extend an invitation to you to become a part of our family by donating. And there are many ways in order for you to be able to do that. One is to simply go to our website at slca.com, and there you will find all different kinds of prompts that will help you support what it is that we are doing here in Atlanta. One way is to become a pledger. That means that you decide on a monthly basis that you are going to help us with this vision. Another way is to donate through our management system called Fellowship One, another through PayPal, and another even easier way is on your cell phone. You can do what's called text to tithe, and that number is 404-796-7030. Again, thank you so much for your support, and I invite you to come back weekly to see what it is that we're up to. Blessings.